Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell. I am the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. We want to welcome you to another episode, and today we are moving into what Greg likes to call the heavy metal. My benignant assistant, I'm a little scared of that word, Greg. Now, as you could tell, we're moving up to the top-level fighters. So Greg has selected the appropriate headgear for me to be flying around with my hair on fire. So I am going to go ahead and what do you think? Is this a good look, Greg? Greg's off camera. He's like, oh yeah, thumbs up. I'm going to go ahead and pull this off and say thank you to Greg for another fun and frightening hat. There we go. Oh, good catch. Not sure we got him in the shot that time. I was a little short. But today we are going into the air superiority fighters, and we are going to start, with the big dog, the F-15 McDonnell Douglas, the F-15 Eagle, which is probably on par to be one of the most effective air superiority fighters built by any nation in modern times. To give you an idea of how effective this airplane is, this aircraft has 100 victories with no losses. Nobody's ever been able to lay a glove on this airplane. They've tried, but the F-15 has been just a stalwart in the American inventory for some time. So I'm going to go ahead and take this. You notice how it's fluid that was, Greg? I got it off without having to fight with it. Good job. So now, before anybody gets too weird on this, there are a lot of variants of this airplane built. This is an F-15E version of the airplane. We're not going to get into each variant. We are going to talk about its final lease on life, because believe it or not, kind of like that C-130, Greg, that we talked about being in the inventory for a very long time, the F-15 has been in the inventory since 1976, if you can believe that, when it was introduced. But let's get into the Wayback Machine and go all the way back to the genesis of this amazing fighter. First of all, I'm going to give you a plan view. Greg can throw up a plan view of the airplane as well. The F-15 has its genesis all the way back into the middle 60s. And what was happening at that time was, and we've done other episodes on some of these aircraft, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but what was happening was the United States was getting pulled deeper and deeper into the Vietnam War, and we also had a very, very, I want to say, hot Cold War on our hands with the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact forces. The United States, with the Century Series fighters, had gone through a lot of quick development in designs, many of which we've covered in our inventory. The reality of the situation was, though, as we got into aerial combat into Vietnam, we were finding that the MiG-17, the MiG-21, and believe it or not, even the MiG-15 were able to get in close to the American aircraft and score victories, score kills, aerial kills. And we were finding out that the big airplanes that we had designed, although they went flat and fast, they weren't necessarily very maneuverable. And they were really big. And the Russian aircraft that we were up against, primarily Russian-designed airplanes in some of their allies, they were smaller, they were more nimble, and they could get in close with those guns. Remember, the Russians had not abandoned gunfighting on their airplanes. They had missiles, they were working on air-to-air missiles, both radar and heat-seeking, but they were still gunfighters. The Americans, on the other hand, had become more and more reliant on speed. The airplanes had gotten bigger, and they had pretty much dropped the gun. Now, the airplane that was primarily bearing the brunt of that during that time frame was the F-4 Phantom. The F-4 Phantom is proof that with enough thrust, a brick will fly. It is a huge airplane. And the problem with it was, and we've done a segment on the F-4 Phantom, you can go back and look at that segment, was that the fixed wing on the Phantom, it just didn't turn well. It was big, it was lumbering. We did later put a slotted wing on it to allow it to change the shape of the wing, to allow the airplane to turn better with, like in our inventory, our F-4S. But the reality of the situation was that the F-4 was not an airplane that you wanted to get into what we call a knife fight, right? In fighter parlance, you did not want to get into a knife fight with one of these lighter MiGs, especially with an operator of the MiG that really knew what he was doing, because you were going to be in for a rough time. An experienced pilot in an F-4 could defeat a MiG. There's no question. A MiG-17, MiG-21, or a MiG-15, but you had your hands full with that airplane. So what ended up happening was we had stopgap, and we had air-to-ground in the F-105s with a Thunder Chief that were flying strike missions into Vietnam, and the F-4s were flying cover. They were getting the job done, but it was primarily through superior training that we were doing it. And the Russians who were supplying, and Chinese that were supplying equipment to the Vietnamese, were also really husbanding their resources, especially those coveted MiG-21s that the North Vietnamese had. They would put them up, they would ambush the American forces, but the North Vietnamese were primarily relying on this layered air defense with AAA, which aircraft artillery, and missiles. There was a huge debate going on in the Pentagon. So the Air Force and the Navy were getting pressure from Secretary McNamara at that time, Defense Secretary McNamara, because he was looking for the services to standardize their equipment. And some of this, you can see it, the doctrine, all the way now into like the Navy with the F-18, what I call Swiss Army knife airplanes, which was they were dropping a lot of different specialized variants and trying to get airplanes that would do a lot of multi-mission. You give up something with that, we're not going to debate that today, but as opposed to just mission-centric airplanes, but the military, because of cost and training, was trying to centralize everything. So McNamara was leaning on the services, and he was pushing them for a standardized fighter concept that was called the TFX program. Now, the TFX program, for you aficionados, eventually led to the F-111 and the F-14. I'm going to talk about those in relation to this airplane in a minute. Now, the F-111 and the F-14 have that variable swept wing. They can sweep the wing in and out. Greg can throw up a graphic of that. But he was pushing that, and that's where the services were headed initially. So the F-111 and the F-14 were going down that variable wing path ultimately, and we are going to get in the lineup here. Some of you at home are going, well, you have an F-14. Talk about the F-14. I intend to, Greg. I intend to, but not today. But the one thing that led to the demise of the F-14 ultimately in naval service, and it was a fantastic fighter. It's a movie star, Top Gun, Tom Cruise, and all that fun stuff. But the maintenance on that airplane was horrendous. And when they got the variable wing aircraft into maintenance, with the services got experience with them, they started to realize that they were just a real problem. So what they migrated to was more of a fixed wing design. This aircraft, what eventually became the F-15, actually is the first dedicated air superiority fighter that the United States had built since the F-86, since the Korean War, if you can believe that. It was designed, was selected from those four. McDonnell Douglas was selected in 1967. The design first flew in 1972. Now, what impacted the design? Greg, you like pasta? I like pasta. Guess who impacted the design on this? You know, there's the mafia out there, right? You got to be a good boy in the mafia, right? Well, there was the fighter mafia within the Air Force. Colonel Boyd led what was nicknamed the fighter mafia. Now, what the fighter mafia, their job and what they were focused on was they were really aggressive in influencing this air superiority fighter design. And why were they doing that? Well, Boyd had come up with his energy maneuverability thrust theory, and the idea behind it was, remember when we talk about other episodes, we talked about if an inch was better, or if an inch was good, 2 inches was better, you would put out tails and airfoils and things of that nature, and thrust components in the airplanes. They didn't really understand everything that was going on. So they would go out and break stuff in order to solve the design. What Boyd did was Boyd had figured out that energy and the amount of energy that you have in the aircraft and how it affects the maneuverability is key. So how much go-go you got coming out of the back, how much thrust, the weight of the airplane, and the wing area all impact maneuverability and the ability to be successful in combat. That is what he came up with. And his entire theory, Colonel Boyd's entire theory, was that if you could maintain your speed is critical in air combat. If you could maintain your speed and you had an airplane that was maneuverable enough, you could win any day against any adversary. So they kept inputting into the size of this wing and how much thrust that the airplane could put out, and ultimately its speed. This aircraft was eventually clocked out at speed-wise at 2.5 Mach. They had actually been looking at higher speeds, but they realized that the economy of thrust and the maneuverability, along with the wing area, how much wing the airplane had, ultimately they came up with this optimum performance envelope, and that is how they came up with the design for the F-15. Now, what they were up against, what were they up against? We talked about the MiG-21 and variants on the MiG-21. MiG-21 is a great airplane. The reality of the situation was, if you look at a MiG-21, the pilot's buried down into the fuselage, and you don't have, this is a two-seat version of this airplane in like a Strike Eagle configuration, but in all of the American fighters, and you can see it in this one behind me, they have that high visibility canopy, which they're putting the pilot up high so he can see 360 degrees around his when he's fighting, so he has a good field of view. That's one of the key changes. And you look at the F-16 and any of the modern era American air superiority fighters, they all, though, had the incorporated Boyd's theory ultimately in design with wing area and thrust and the overall weight of the airplane. Now, the F-15 was the heavyweight. We're going to get into the F-16 at some point. The F-16 was the bantamweight fighter, a point defense fighter. And then the F-18 actually came out of that program and went on to the Navy. But this is the airplane that set the day. So Boyd and the fighter mafia were critical in setting this up. Now, the other thing that was a game changer for the F-15 was the radar in the nose. It had a look-down, shoot-down radar, which meant that it could track multiple targets. If you're in close enough, you can get in with those heat-seeking, those Sidewinder missiles that can actually see it. But the idea was, as we got into these aircraft and whatever radar they were using, Hughes was built a number of these radars. The idea was that you could look over the horizon, tell the missile where it was, and then fire, and then you don't even have to get in close. You don't have to get in close. Now, we're going to talk about why that is important, still important with this airplane in a little bit. But that was basically the overall concept of the airplane. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about all of these air superiority drivers, and I want to salute them. I'm going to put this back on its pedestal and not drop it. This is a really nice model, Greg. You got a good one there. If I can get it back on its little peg there we go. I want to salute all of these drivers. This airplane behind me wears the name of John Goldenbaum. He was a F-15 driver and a really good Cold Warrior. These guys in the Cold War especially really held the line. This aircraft, as I said, if we had ever come into a hot war, this aircraft would have been one of the first ones in. But this is what probably prevented a war, because the Russians understood how capable this airplane was. So for all of you F-15 drivers, I want to say thank you for your service. There are many guys that are still flying this airplane in different variants, so it is still in service to this day, but we want to say thank you. Now Greg has gone out and he has gotten, let's see, Kutztown. It's K-U-T-Z town, Kutztown, since 18, I think that's 31. Sarsaparilla. I don't know that I've ever, have you fed me sarsaparilla before? I'm not sure, Greg. Let's see, 150 calories. So this one is Kutztown Soda Works. It's got pure cane. You love pure cane sugar. Every one of these has pure cane sugar in it. We're going to try this. There is no sell-by date. There's one of those F-16 operators that's squealing because I'm talking about F-15 operators. But we're going to put this down, and I am going to go ahead and give this a shot. I don't remember having this, but we're going to do it. To all you F-15 drivers, congratulations. Thank you for your service. Those folks that are still out on the front line, we very much appreciate what you're doing. Cheers. Well, that's flat, so this could be a definite botulism candidate here, Greg. If I just keel over, that's what it is. Nah. I get you hit it. You hit it well last week, although the color of that stuff was kind of frightening. This one, not so much. They're not a sponsor of the program. We'll give it one more shot, as we always do. Although, you know, it actually does kind of taste like root beer, so that's kind of fun. But just a little bit off, Greg. A little bit off. Just a teensy-weensy bit. So there were 1,198 of these aircraft built in each variant. They also fly for foreign forces. Probably the guys that have seen the most combat in this would be the Israelis, which are flying it, and they have flown against every variant of MiG there is, and they have had a very impressive kill ratio with the airplane. So they really prove the airplane in combat, but there are a number of other countries that are flying the airplane. Now, the interesting thing about this is this aircraft, Greg, is still in service as now it is the Boeing, because McDonnell Douglas is gone, but it is the Boeing F-15EX. Now let's talk about what that means, Greg. That means that doctrine has changed. Now what has changed? What do you think, Greg? Do you know what's changed? I'm going to tell you. The integrated battlefield. We've talked about drones in the past, but the thing that has changed now is, as opposed to singular weapon systems operating out there in their sphere, because of advancements in data link and memory technology, in other words, being able to have higher and higher memory in the devices and higher speed data links, what we're happening now is the drones are talking to the F-35s that are talking to something else, that are talking to a battlefield commander. Well, the F-15EX has turned into a missile truck. It can carry up to 22 air-to-air missiles. So being a missile truck, these will now stand off. They're taking data feeds from the F-35 or drones or whatever. They'll feed that into their radar-guided weapons, and they'll fire over the horizon, volley fire. That concept also is being talked about for the B-1, the B-1 bomber, and the B-52, that essentially you'll just have these aircraft that'll be up on station, and rather than what we talked about, knife fighting, they'll just volley fire at the enemy and attrit them from over the horizon. So this airplane is going to continue to have a life. So get a lot of questions about artifacts in the collection. This artifact behind me is actually a instrument familiarization unit that was built for the United States Air Force. It has also been in a number of movies, but it was actually built and designed to teach pilots where the location of instruments are and to teach muscle memory in training as they're transitioning into the airplane. So it has a lot of components from an F-15 in it, but it was specifically built for training. So, Greg, one of the most fun and exciting things you could do is you can own your own F-15 with this fun, exciting Hot Wings product. You can go out, Greg does this, he makes little jet noises in the office, and he has his own little Air Force going there. But you go out to the website, this is a Strike Eagle. You can actually get this on the website. Now, if you're feeling a bit more crafty, you can go out and build. We had one of these on an Apache a week or so ago. You can actually go out and build this, which is kind of fun. I always like doing that. I don't know about you, Greg. I used to build all kinds of model airplanes when I was a kid. So this is fun. You go out to the website and order that and buy it. But this is our step and our wrap-up into what I call the heavy metal fighters. We're going to work our way for about the next month, 2 months, all the way through all of the heavy metal in the American inventory. So go out to our YouTube channel, like us on YouTube, subscribe, send our video to one of those aviation aficionados that you know. Get over to our webpage, give us that donation. We can't do these donations without you. And remember to like us on Facebook. My name is Fred Bell. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.